"This is Islamophobia," she said, and her voice cracked on the word, tears streaming down her face. "This is racism disguised as oversight, and the American people see right through it." The hearing room held its breath. Representative Ilhan Omar stood at the witness table in the Rayburn House Office Building Room 2154, 7 hours into testimony. Her composure finally shattered. She'd cried, not performed, actually cried. Told the story of the refugee camp, the war, the 12-year-old girl who didn't speak English, the death threats, the man who'd charged her with a syringe just the week before. For 30 seconds, she had the room. For 30 seconds, she was sympathetic even to people who disagreed with everything she believed. Then she said, "Islamophobia." And the room shifted because everyone had been watching for 7 hours. And in 7 hours, Speaker Mike Johnson had not mentioned Islam once. Johnson waited. Patient, he waited until she sat down. Waited until her lawyer put a hand on her arm. Waited until the gallery settled and the murmuring stopped, and the C-SPAN cameras found his face. Then he spoke, and his voice was the same flat clinical tone it had been all day. The voice of an accountant reading a column of numbers that don't add up. "Congresswoman, I have not mentioned your religion once today. Not once. Check the transcript. I haven't mentioned your race. I haven't mentioned your hijab, your immigration status, or your background." He picked up 2 pieces of paper from the table, held them up so the cameras could see 2 congressional financial disclosure forms. The most boring documents in Washington, the kind nobody ever reads. "I've talked about these, your documents, your numbers, your signature." He placed them side by side. "This one says your household was worth $158,000. This one says it's worth up to $30 million. You earn $174,000 a year, and in 7 hours you haven't explained a single dollar of the difference." He looked at her. Then he looked at the gallery, at the Somali-American women who had driven from Minneapolis. Muslim women from her district, her constituents. Are they Islamophobic? Are they racist? They want to know the same thing I want to know. He paused. Where did the money come from? Silence. The kind that has weight. The kind the cameras love and politicians fear. Omar's mouth opened, closed. Her lawyer whispered. She shook her head. No answer. It was the silence that would lead every newscast. Not the tears, not the refugee story, not the accusations of persecution, the silence of a woman who couldn't explain her own bank account. To understand how they got here, how a congresswoman who'd survived Trump, survived death threats, survived being stripped from committees, survived being called a terrorist on cable news every night for 6 years, ended up undone by a piece of paper she'd signed herself. You have to go back. 8 hours to the morning, when Ilhan Omar walked into the Capitol thinking she knew what was coming, when she had no idea that Mike Johnson wasn't going to attack her identity. He was going to read her receipts. It was just after 8 in the morning when she sat in her Longworth building office reviewing talking points with her team. David Brennan, her attorney, a K Street veteran who charged $800 an hour and had shepherded half a dozen members of Congress through ethics complaints, sat across from her with a legal pad full of anticipated questions and rehearsed answers. Standard playbook, Brennan said. They'll ask about feeding our future. You had nothing to do with it. They'll ask about campaign finance. FEC dismissed the complaint in 2021, unanimous decision. They'll ask about your financial disclosures. Everything was filed properly. If they push on Tim's businesses, we defer to your husband's right to conduct private business without congressional interference. Omar nodded, scrolling through her phone. Her mentions were already flooding. Progressive allies posting support. squad members tweeting solidarity. The hashtag Defend Ilhan was climbing. The machine was working. It always worked. Every attack on her became a fundraising cycle, a media tour, a chapter in the story of a refugee who refused to be broken. "They've been investigating me for months," she said. "If they had anything real, we'd know by now. This is red meat for the MAGA base. Same thing they always do. Same thing Trump does every time his numbers drop. Attack the Muslim woman from Minnesota." She put her phone down and looked at Brennan. "Honestly, this might be good for us. Primaries coming up. Every time Republicans drag me into a hearing, my small dollar donations spike. Let them waste their time." Brennan didn't share her optimism entirely. Lawyers are paid to worry. But he saw no legal exposure. The FEC complaint had been dismissed. Her disclosures were filed. The fraud cases in the district were ugly, but she wasn't named in any of them. As far as he could tell, this hearing was a political exercise, and political exercises were Omar's home turf. Her chief of staff, Ila Bashir, had the media strategy mapped out. "The second they go after you on anything Somalia-related, we pivot to the refugee story. If they bring up the fraud cases, we point out you were never charged, never implicated, never named in any indictment. If they hit your finances, Tim's businesses are his businesses. You have student loans. You've been transparent." "I have been transparent," Omar said, and she believed it, because she'd told herself the same thing so many times it had calcified into conviction. The FEC had dismissed the complaint. The financial disclosures were filed. The fact that Tim Mynette's company had gone from being worth $1 to being worth $25 million in a single year was just good business. The fact that she'd refused to disclose his exact ownership stakes was her right. What she didn't know, couldn't have known, was that 3 blocks away in the Speaker's office in the Capitol, Mike Johnson was preparing something she hadn't anticipated. Not an attack on her identity, not a conspiracy theory about Somalia, not even a criminal accusation. Something much simpler and much more devastating. He was going to read her own paperwork back to her. Johnson sat at his desk with Tom Emerson, his chief counsel, a former assistant U.S. attorney who had spent 12 years prosecuting public corruption. Emerson had a reputation for being meticulous and humorless, which made him excellent at his job. "Walk me through the sequencing one more time," Johnson said. Emerson flipped through his outline. "Phase 1, the district. We establish what happened. Feeding our future. $250 million stolen. 78 indicted. 56 convicted. Almost all in her district. We make it real. We read names, sentences, we show the map. Phase 2. Proximity. Safari land. The fundraisers. The staffer who got convicted. We show she wasn't just a bystander. Phase 3. The money. Her financial disclosures. The jump from $158,000 to potentially $30 million. Tim Mynette's businesses. The E Street Group payments. The winery fraud allegations. The cannabis deal collapse. The OFAC freeze. We don't accuse her of stealing. We just ask where the money came from and watch her not answer. Phase 4. Her own words. We play the clips, the Benjamin's tweet, the Somali speech, the defense of fraud investigators being racist. Phase 5. The shield. We show the pattern. Every time someone investigated fraud in her district, someone cried racism, and she amplified it. Johnson nodded. Tone clinical, Emerson said. Prosecutorial. No emotion, no name-calling, no culture war. We never mention her religion. We never mention her race. We never mention immigration. We talk about money, documents, votes, and her own recorded statements. If she brings up identity, that's her problem. We talk about receipts. Johnson felt the weight of what he was about to do. He wasn't trying to destroy someone. He was trying to hold someone accountable. At least he believed there was a difference. "Let's go," he said. At 9:45, both sides converged on the hearing room. Omar entered through the main corridor, surrounded by supporters. Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Rashida Tlaib walked beside her, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. She stopped for a brief statement. "This hearing is a political hit job designed to silence a black Muslim woman who speaks truth to power. I will not be silenced. I will not be intimidated." The statement was polished, practiced. She looked exactly the way she wanted to look: strong, defiant, unbowed. Johnson came in through a side entrance, carrying his binder, avoiding cameras, looking like an accountant heading to an audit. The hearing room filled, every seat taken, press gallery packed. The gallery was a split screen of America. Omar supporters in purple "We Stand with Ilhan" shirts on one side, and on the other, a small group of Somali-American women who had driven from Minneapolis. They weren't wearing political shirts. They were wearing the faces of people who had something to say, and had waited a long time to say it. At 10 o'clock sharp, Johnson gave the hearing to order. "The Committee on Oversight and Accountability will come to order. We are here today to examine questions of fraud, accountability, and constituent representation in federal assistance programs, with specific focus on events in Minnesota's 5th Congressional District." His voice was dry, procedural, deliberately boring. This wasn't theater. This was paperwork. "Congresswoman Omar, you are here pursuant to subpoena. You have the right to counsel. You have the right to make an opening statement. Do you understand these rights?" "I do." "Would you like to make an opening statement?" She stood, looked at the cameras, drew a breath. "Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you." And she gave the speech. The refugee story, the camp in Kenya, becoming a citizen, being elected. "Everything I have done has been in service of my constituents," she said. "I did not commit fraud. I was not charged with fraud. This hearing is a political exercise designed to punish me for being who I am." Her supporters applauded. Johnson let it run for a few seconds, then gave them quiet. "Thank you, Congresswoman. That was a moving statement. Now, let's look at the record." He opened the binder to the red tab. "Let's start with what happened in your district." Johnson pulled up a map on the screen behind him. Minnesota's 5th Congressional District. On the map, red dots marked the locations of Feeding Our Future meal distribution sites that were later identified as fraudulent. There were dozens of them. "The Feeding Our Future scandal," Johnson began, "is the largest pandemic-era fraud in American history. A nonprofit called Feeding Our Future claimed to distribute meals to children. During COVID, the program expanded dramatically. Feeding Our Future went from handling 3 to 4 million annually to claiming reimbursements for 91 million meals. He let that number land. 91 million meals. Except most of those meals were never served. The sites were fake. The attendance rosters were filled with invented names. The invoices were forged, and the money, $250 million of federal funds meant to feed hungry children, was stolen. He read from the Department of Justice press release. Stolen and used to buy luxury cars, vacation properties, jewelry, commercial real estate in Minnesota, Kenya, and Turkey. Some of the money was wired overseas to accounts in Mogadishu. 78 people have been indicted, more than 56 convicted. Most of the other defendants are members of the Somali American community, your constituents, Congresswoman, people who live in your district, people who voted for you. He began reading names slowly, one at a time. Mohammed Ismail, 12 years in federal prison. Abdai Aziz Farah, 9 years. Abdumajid Noor, 6 years. He went through a dozen names, each one a constituent, each one a federal conviction. The room was silent except for his voice. In the gallery, a woman pressed her hand to her mouth. She recognized some of the names. Now, Congresswoman, when did you first become aware that there were problems with this program? Omar shifted in her seat. Her lawyer leaned forward. Congresswoman Omar was never involved in the Feeding Our Future organization and had no role in— I didn't ask about her role, Johnson interrupted gently. I asked when she became aware. The Minnesota Department of Education flagged irregularities as early as 2020. Their inspectors visited sites and found empty rooms, no children, no food. The department tried to slow reimbursements. And what happened? Feeding Our Future sued the state, claimed the investigation was racially motivated because many of their operators were Somali American. A Ramsey County judge actually held the Minnesota Department of Education in contempt and ordered them to keep paying while the lawsuit was pending. Did your office support Feeding Our Future's position? Did you make any public statements supporting the claim that the state's oversight was racially motivated? Omar started carefully. I have always stood against racial profiling in all its forms. I'm not asking about racial profiling in the abstract. I'm asking about this specific case, a $250 million fraud, an investigation that was delayed because someone cried racism. Did you support that narrative? He clicked to a video. Omar, at a press conference from early 2026, speaking about the broader federal fraud investigation. Her voice filled the room. There is no reason for them to use this level of rhetoric. There is no reason for them to fully stop these programs. The only reason they are doing that is for PR purposes. Johnson stopped the clip. $250 million stolen, 78 people indicted, 56 convicted, and you called the investigation PR purposes. Were the convictions for PR, Congresswoman? No answer. Just a glare. Johnson shifted to the blue tab. Let me ask about Safari Land Restaurant. Omar's jaw tightened. Safari Land Restaurant in Minneapolis, co-owned by Salim Saeed, who has since been convicted of wire fraud in connection with the Feeding Our Future scheme. According to trial evidence, Safari Land was one of the original fraudulent meal sites. It's a restaurant with approximately 40 seats. It claimed to be serving thousands of meals per day to children. He pulled up a photograph. Omar at a community event at Safari Land Restaurant. You held events at this location. Multiple events. You knew the owners. A former member of your own staff was also convicted in the Feeding Our Future case. Omar shifted. Mr. Speaker, attending community events is literally my job. I understand that. But this restaurant was claiming federal reimbursements for thousands of meals per day. Its co-owner is now in federal prison, and you were there regularly enough that political operatives in your district considered it essential to your political network. Her lawyer interjected, but Johnson continued. The question the American people are asking isn't whether you personally filled out fake meal count forms. The question is whether the largest fraud in American history happened all around you, in your district, among your supporters, and you somehow noticed nothing. Who were you protecting, Congresswoman? Your constituents or the people who were stealing from them? Johnson opened the green tab. Let's talk about your personal finances. He held up the two disclosure forms again. Turner, 2022. Your household net worth was listed as between $50,000 and $158,000. 2024. Your household assets are listed as potentially worth between $6 million and $30 million. Your husband's stake in a venture capital firm called Rose Lake Capital is valued at $5 to $25 million. That's a change of somewhere between 4,000% and 20,000% in 2 years. Now, I understand asset values grow, but let's look at the timeline. Tim Minot, your husband since 2020. Your campaign paid E Street Group approximately $3 million. Venture number 1, a winery sued for making investment money disappear. Venture number 2, a cannabis business in South Dakota, where entrepreneurs say they're owed $1.2 million. Venture number 3, Rose Lake Capital. In your 2023 disclosure, you listed its value as between $1 and $1,000. 1 year later, it was worth between $5 million and $25 million. A company worth $1 becomes worth $25 million in 12 months. At the same time, the largest fraud investigation in Minnesota history is unfolding in your district. You have refused to disclose his exact ownership percentages in any of these companies. Omar's lawyer stood. The Congresswoman's disclosures comply with all legal requirements. Then what is his individual share? Johnson asked simply. Silence. If you can't or won't provide it, why? Your husband's company had funds frozen by the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC. This agency oversees terrorist financing and money laundering. Can you explain why OFAC was involved with your husband's company? Omar's lawyer whispered. She shook her head. We're not going to discuss pending legal matters. So, there is a pending legal matter involving OFAC and your husband's company. More silence. Johnson sat back. Your campaign paid your husband $3 million. One of his companies had funds frozen by the anti-money laundering arm of the Treasury. Your household went from worth less than a used car to worth potentially $30 million in 24 months. And you won't explain any of it. Either these forms are inaccurate or you owe the American people an explanation. Which is it, Congresswoman? Johnson opened the yellow tab. He reached for his tablet. Congresswoman, I want to play a few clips. He played the first clip. It's all about the Benjamin's baby. He read her subsequent apology about anti-Semitic tropes and financial interests driving behavior. You apologized for suggesting that money buys political loyalty. Do you stand by that apology? I do. Good. So, the idea that money creates improper political influence is a serious accusation. Your campaign paid your husband $3 million. After you married him, his companies suddenly became worth millions more. You sit on committees that affect the industries his companies operate in. By your own standard, wouldn't it be fair for someone to ask whether the $3 million your campaign paid your husband created any kind of improper loyalty? Omar stared at him. That's completely different. Why, because it's you? He moved to the second clip. The Somali speech from January 2024. He showed the viral translation, then the fair translation about the Ethiopia-Somaliland dispute. I'm not going to use a bad translation against you, Johnson said. Omar briefly relaxed. But you retweeted a translation of your own speech that read, "While I am in Congress, no one will take Somalia's sea." You made your seat in the United States Congress into an instrument of Somali foreign policy. Were you speaking as an American Congresswoman or as a representative of Somalia? He played the third clip from Face the Nation, where she called the fraud investigation PR purposes. Johnson leaned forward. Were the 56 convictions for PR? Were the 12-year prison sentences for PR? Were the children who didn't get fed just props? Those women in the gallery right there, they drove from Minneapolis. Somali American mothers whose children were supposed to get meals and didn't. One of them reported it to your office. Your office never responded. A gasp from the gallery. One of the women nodded. Omar looked at the gallery. For the first time, she looked like she recognized these people were not on her side. Who were you protecting, Congresswoman? When you called the investigators racist, were you protecting your constituents? Or were you protecting the ecosystem that was making your household very, very rich? He pulled up a final timeline. 2020, hot flags irregularities in feeding our future. Organization cries racism. Investigation slows. 2020, 2022. Fraud continues. Another $100 million disappears. Money flows overseas. 2022. FBI raids. You call it political persecution. 2024. Your disclosures show assets worth potentially $30 million. 2026. 56 convictions. You call it PR. Every step of the way, the race card was played. You gave it a congressional seal of approval. You made it politically dangerous for any investigator to ask hard questions because they knew a sitting member of Congress would accuse them of racism. And the ringleader, Amy Bach, was a white woman. Prosecutors described her as using fake claims of racism to silence oversight. You, Congresswoman, helped her do it. Do you understand what that did to the Somali American families who reported fraud and were ignored because the system was afraid of being called racist by you? Omar stood, her voice shaking with anger. She gave the speech she had surmounted, the refugee journey, the threats, the man with the syringe. Everything I have done has been in service of my community. I have had death threats. And now you use my community's pain as a weapon against me. I didn't steal anything. The FEC dismissed the complaint. Still, you question my loyalty, because that's what you do to people who look like me. She was crying now, genuinely crying. Then she said, "This is Islamophobia. This is racism disguised as oversight." Johnson waited. Let her sit down. Then he picked up the disclosure forms. Congresswoman, I have not mentioned your religion once today. I've talked about financial disclosures you signed here, campaign payments you authorized. These are your documents. If being asked to explain a 20,000% increase in your net worth is Islamophobia, then what do you call it when your own constituents ask the same question? He turned to the Somali American women. Are they Islamophobic? They're Muslim. They're Somali. And they want to know, where did the money come from? Omar sat. She had nothing left. The refugee story was aimed at the wrong accusation. Johnson hadn't questioned her faith. He'd questioned her bank account. Johnson straightened his papers. The largest welfare fraud in American history happened in Congresswoman Omar's district. Every time investigators looked into it, they were accused of racism. Congresswoman Omar amplified that accusation. While this was happening, her household wealth exploded, from $158,000 to potentially $30 million in 24 months. She refuses to explain the wealth. I am making the following referrals. First, to the Department of Justice for investigation of the accuracy of your financial disclosures. Second, to the House Ethics Committee for failure to comply with disclosure norms. Third, to the IRS for review of joint tax filings. Fourth, to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence for review of your security clearance. This hearing is adjourned. He stood. Omar sat at the witness table, her lawyer talking to her, but she didn't seem to hear. Her supporters were chanting, but it sounded far away. The Somali-American women from Minneapolis were walking out. They didn't look at her. The clips went viral. A side-by-side of two forms, $158,000 versus $30 million. Salary, $174,000. Math doesn't have a political party. Even sympathetic outlets couldn't avoid the numbers. In Minneapolis, a local imam gave a sermon about accountability. When someone claims to speak for us, we have the right to ask, are they speaking for us or for themselves? One constituent, a nurse named Halima, said, I came as a refugee just like her. I work 60 hours a week and pay my taxes. When people stole money meant to feed our children, she called the investigators racist. She didn't protect us. She protected them. She's worth $30 million, and I'm still paying off school lunch debt. The House Ethics Committee opened a formal inquiry within a week, not into fraud, but into the disclosures. Boring questions, the kind that end careers with an audit. Omar held a press conference calling it political persecution. But the question just sat there. Patient, like Mike Johnson. $158,000 to $30 million on a government salary. Where did the money come from? She never said. And in Washington, what you don't say is louder than anything you do.